Hello everyone and welcome to our Secret Garden book club. I am recording this from inside the Secret Garden. There are a few things here we will be exploring, but not quite yet. So today we will be talking about the children's classic, The Secret Garden. It's a book about friendship, nature and mystery. There will be a little bit of a mystery for you to think about during this session, so make sure you pay close attention. It might be helpful for you to have a pen and a piece of paper with you so you can just write down a couple of notes if you notice anything strange during the video. Now, before we get started, I need to introduce 4 characters to you. Our first protagonist is Mary Lennox, a 10-year-old girl sent to live with her uncle in Yorkshire after the passing of her parents. She is spoilt and unlikable, but we do see her change as the story goes on. Next up is Colin, who spent his entire life bedridden because his family thought he was sick. He's a gloomy character because of this, but he does lighten up as he begins to explore the garden with Mary. Mary first finds out about Colin because she hears him crying from somewhere in the house and sets out to investigate. Martha is Mary's friend and maidservant. She's kind and level-headed, and she does support Mary quite a lot throughout the story. Lastly, Ben. Ben is the elderly gardener who tends to the secret garden, and he helps to guide Mary to it by introducing him to a kind Robin. So now we have set the scene a little, let's read about how Mary is led to the secret garden. Mary has started enjoying her time outside and has discovered there is a closed-off part of the grounds that she can't access. Ben the gardener has already introduced her to his friend the Robin, but Mary is pondering the garden beyond the wall. She walked away, slowly thinking. She had begun to like the garden, just as she had begun to like the Robin and Dickon and Martha's mother. She was beginning to like Martha too. That seemed a good many people to like, when you were not used to liking. She thought of the Robin as one of the people. She went to her walk outside the long ivy-covered wall, over which she could see the treetops. And the second time she walked up and down, the most interesting and exciting thing happened to her, and it was all through Ben Weatherstaff's Robin. She heard a chirp and a twitter, and when she looked at the bare flower bed at her left side, there he was hopping about and pretending to peck things out of the earth to persuade her that he had not followed her. But she knew he had followed her, and the surprise so filled her with delight that she almost trembled a little. "You do remember me," she cried. "You do. You are prettier than anything else in the world." She chirped and talked and coaxed, and he hopped and flirted his tail and twittered. It was as if he were talking. His red waistcoat was like satin, and he puffed his tiny breast out, and was so fine and so grand and so pretty that it was really as if he was showing her how important and like a human person a Robin could be. Mistress Mary forgot that she had ever been contrary in her life when he allowed her to draw closer and closer to him and bend down and talk and try to make something like Robin sounds. Oh, to think that he should actually let her come as near to him as that. He knew nothing in the world would make her put out her hand towards him or startle him in the least tiniest way. He knew it because he was a real person, only nicer than any other person in the world. She was so happy that she scarcely dared to breathe. The flower bed was not quite bare, but there were tall shrubs and low ones which grew together at the back of the bed, and as the Robin hopped about under them, she saw him hop over a small pile of freshly turned up earth. He stopped on it to look for a worm. The earth had been turned up because a dog had been trying to dig up a mole, and he had scratched quite a deep hole. Mary looked at it, not really knowing why the hole was there, and as she looked, she saw something almost buried in the newly turned soil. It was something like a ring of rusty iron or brass, and when the Robin flew up into a tree nearby, she pulled out her hand and picked the ring up. It was more than a ring, however. It was an old key, which looked as if it had been buried a long time. Mistress Mary stood up and looked at it with an almost frightened face as it hung from her finger. "Perhaps it has been buried for 10 years, she said in a whisper. "Perhaps it is the key to the garden." She looked at the key quite a long time. She turned it over and over and thought about it. As I have said before, she was not a child who had been trained to ask permission or consult her elders about things. All she thought about the key was that if it was the key to the closed garden, and she could find out where the door was, she could perhaps open it and see what was inside the walls and what had happened to the old rose trees. It was because it had been shut up so long that she wanted to see it. It seemed as if it must be different from other places, and that something strange must have happened to it during 10 years. Besides that, if she liked it, she could go into it every day and shut the door behind her, and she could make up some play of her own and play it quite alone, because nobody would ever know where she was, but would think the door was still locked and the key buried in the earth. The thought of that pleased her very much. Living, as it were, all by herself in a house with 100 mysteriously closed rooms, and having nothing whatsoever to do to amuse herself, had set her inactive brain to work and was actually awakening her imagination. She put the key in her pocket and walked up and down her walk. No one but herself ever seemed to come there, so she could walk slowly and look at the wall, or rather at the ivy growing on it. The ivy was the baffling thing. Howsoever carefully she looked, she could see nothing but thickly growing, glossy, dark green leaves. She was very much disappointed. Something of her contrariness came back to her as she paced the wall and looked over it at the treetops inside. It seemed so silly, she said to herself, to be near it and not be able to get in. She took the key in her pocket when she went back to the house, and she made up her mind that she would always carry it with her when she went out, so that if she ever should find the hidden door, she would be ready. Oh, a tiny key. It's just fallen out of the book. How strange. It's so small, it can't possibly fit a door. It's got something inscribed in it as well. There's the number 66. I wonder what it could mean. Now, as it just fell out of the book, I wonder if 66 corresponds to something in here. What do you think? Shall I turn to page 66 and see what I can find? It's very strange. There's nothing unusual about this page at all. Why don't you have a look at the page and see if you can find something strange about it? So it appears to be the scene where Mary can hear Colin crying, but she doesn't know it's him yet, so she gets told off and sent back to bed. There seems to be a key in the top left-hand corner. Can you see that? I wonder if there's a hidden message on this page. Did you write down the numbers that popped up on the screen while I was reading earlier? If you didn't, don't worry. I've written them down too. So if you've got your pen and paper handy, write down these numbers. 127, 105, 27 and 79. And now look back at the page and see if you can find something in that page that corresponds to those numbers. So, how did you get on? Did you find the answer? When I looked through the page, I found the words locked in the box. And I'm wondering if it has something to do with the box here. Shall we have a look? Let's see. I mean, it is a tiny key for a tiny lock. Shall I open it and see what I can find? Let's see. A robin. Now that we've set him free, I wonder if we can find the entrance to the secret garden. Mary skipped round all the gardens and round the orchard, resting every few minutes. At length she went her own special walk and made up her mind to try if she could skip the whole length of it. You showed me where the key was yesterday, she said. You ought to show me the door today. But I don't believe you know. The robin flew from his swinging spray of ivy onto the top of the wall, and he opened his beak and sang a loud, lovely trill, merely to show off. Nothing in the world is quite as adorably lovely as a robin when he shows off, and they are nearly always doing it. One of the nice little gusts of wind rushed down the walk, and it was a stronger one than the rest. It was strong enough to wave the branches of the trees, and it was more than strong enough to sway the trailing sprays of untrimmed ivy hanging from the wall. Mary had stepped close to the robin, and suddenly the gust of wind swung aside some loose ivy trails, and more suddenly still she jumped towards it and caught it in her hand. This she did because she had seen something under it, a round knob, which had been covered by the leaves hanging over it. It was the knob of a door. She put her hands under the leaves and began to pull and push them aside. Thick as the ivy hung, it nearly all was a loose and swinging curtain, though some had crept over wood and iron. Mary's heart began to thump and her hands to shake a little in her delight and excitement. The robin kept singing and twittering away and tilting his head on one side, as if he were as excited as she was. What was this under her hands, which was square and made of iron, and which her fingers found a hole in? It was the lock of the door, which had been closed 10 years, and she put her hand in her pocket, drew out the key, and found it fitted the keyhole. She put the key in it and turned. It took 2 hands to do it, but it did turn. And then she took a deep breath. And then she took a long breath and looked behind her up the long walk to see if anyone was coming. No one was coming. No one ever did come, it seemed. And she took another long breath, because she could not help it, and she held back the swinging curtain of ivy and pushed back the door, which opened slowly, slowly. Then she slipped through it and shut it behind her, and stood with her back against it, looking about her and breathing quite fast with excitement and wonder and delight. She was standing inside the secret garden. Now Mary has found the hidden entrance to the secret garden with the help of her robin friend. Before we can progress any further, we need to find our own secret garden key. One of the 4 characters I told you about at the beginning of the session is actually hiding the key. Do you remember the names of those 4 characters? We had Mary, Colin, Martha, and Ben. Now, they've left us a puzzle to try to solve, and if we find the answer, I think that it will be a good clue as to who's hiding the key. Are you ready to have a look? Can you see the letters all jumbled up on the screen? I know that if we rearrange these letters, that we will find a word, and that word will lead us to the key. Have you managed to figure it out yet? Let's rearrange the letters and see what word we find. Of course, it was Ben, the gardener. He was the one who introduced Mary to the friendly Robin, so he was a big part of her finding out about the garden. So I think we can find his key from here. Here we go. So now we have the key, we can unlock the next part of the story. It was the sweetest, most mysterious looking place anyone could imagine. The high walls which shut it in were closed with the leafless stems of climbing roses, which were so thick that they were matted together. Mary Lennox knew they were roses because she had seen a great many roses in India. All the ground was covered with grass of a wintry brown, and out of it grew clumps of bushes, which were surely rose bushes if they were alive. There were numbers of standard roses, which had so spread their branches that they were like little trees. There were other trees in the garden, and one of the things which made the place look strangest and loveliest was that climbing roses had run all over them and swung down long tendrils which made light swaying curtains, and here and there they had caught at each other or at a far-reaching branch and had crept from one tree to another and made lovely bridges of themselves. There were neither leaves nor roses on them now, and Mary did not know whether they were dead or alive, but their thin grey or brown branches and sprays looked like a sort of hazy mantle spreading over everything, walls and trees and even brown grass, where they had fallen from their fastenings and run along the ground. It was this hazy tangle from tree to tree which made it look so mysterious. Mary had thought it must be different from other gardens, which had not been left all by themselves so long, and indeed it was different from any other place she had ever seen in her life. "How still it is," she whispered, "how still." Then she waited a moment and listened at the stillness. The robin, who had flown to his tree-top, was still as all the rest. He did not even flutter his wings. He sat without stirring and looked at Mary. "No wonder it is still," she whispered. "I am the first person who has spoken in here for 10 years. She moved away from the door, stepping as softly as if she were afraid of awakening someone. She was glad that there was grass under her feet and that her steps made no sounds. She walked under one of the fairy-like arches between the trees and looked up at the sprays and tendrils which formed them. "I wonder if they are all quite dead," she said. "Is it all a quite dead garden? I wish it wasn't." If she had been Ben Weatherstaff, she could have told whether the wood was alive by looking at it, but she could only see that there were only grey or brown sprays and branches, and none showed any signs of even a tiny leaf bud anywhere. But she was inside the wonderful garden. But she was inside the wonderful garden, and she could come through the door under the ivy any time, and she felt as if she had found a world all her own. The Secret Garden sounds wonderful. Hopefully you've enjoyed this taster of the book. Remember, if you want to find out what happens to the characters and in the rest of the story, then you can download the book for free using our Libby app. And now I'm off to lose myself in the Secret Garden. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to try out some of the activities below. Until next time.